sat down with my friend and astrologer Casey Scott and discussed the frameworks of Vedic astrology, the building blocks of life, how to use them in astrology readings. This is a fantastic overview that you want to watch. Hey folks, it's Sam, and I'm here with my friend and student and excellent astrologer, Casey Scott, and he's going to be talking about Vedic astrology frameworks and some cool stuff today. Casey studied with me for a couple years, and then he's really taken it in his own direction and doing great work. So I wanted to, expose you to him and him to you. And Casey, welcome.
Thanks, Sam, for having me today. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And you're going to be talking about like the Vedic frameworks that underpin astrology and whatnot, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm, fairly new to astrology. I took a course several years ago now, but I still consider myself on that level of ready but not expert, right? So I took your certification course notes and re-looked at everything and teach what I know. That's
Casey's
kind of what
great with his notes, man. I always say, Casey, you got some spreadsheets? No, he's done a great job organizing stuff, and he's very humble as well. He's doing great work. He's doing a lot of reading, so we'll have his information down there, to hit him up for some readings and some of his other offerings. And yeah, want to start just by sharing your story a little bit, like especially how you came to astrology, like from, even like thinking about that stuff when you were a kid or noticing the stars, and how you got into moving from that into actually study and whatnot. It's really, I'd really like to hear the story myself.
Yeah, actually, I pretty much my first encounter with astrology was 5 years ago. So I'm relatively new to even thinking about the world through this framework. And my background is in structural engineering. And so I spent the last 21 years doing blueprints and fabrication drawings and kind of nuts and bolts, left brain type stuff. And then in my early 30s, I came across a kind of a personal development group that had different modalities, and there was all types of people in that group, that from like clairvoyant psychics to Reiki healers and financial gurus, all these types of people. And one of the guys in the group was a Vedic astrologer, and so
we won't say his name.
Yeah, I was just curious about what it was, because I was always interested in, like personality profile things like Myers-Briggs, and just being able to tell things about people.
Interesting. I love Myers-Briggs. It's pretty cool.
It's interesting to just me and my wife always have, when we meet certain people, we're like, that's that person on the wheel. Just it's curious, interesting stuff that we all do, right? I mean, how many times on Facebook have we taken a test to see what kind of Simpsons character we are?
Friends.
It's all those kinds of things are interesting. So anyways, I got this reading, and it was, he was an Indian guy in India, and his method of delivery was just this shotgun delivery, one thing after the other. And I was scrambling, writing notes. I didn't even know what all 12 signs were at that point. So it's just, I still got the paper, and it was me writing these notes. I was like, how does this guy know this stuff, right?
And it was good? It was accurate?
It was very accurate. And I was thinking, did he stalk my Facebook profile? I don't, how did this happen? And it just really captivated my curiosity. And so that sent me on this journey of like, what is this? How does it work? And just this understanding. And that I went on the path that a lot of people go on, which was YouTube videos, and which send you in a million different directions.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out what's what, who to listen to, who not to listen to. And then on YouTube, one of my one day I came across Sam Geppi, and you had this approach that you called scientific astrology. I was like, that's my alley, right? I can get behind that. And so I signed up for your emails, and I got a thing on the email saying, take the certification test. And at that point I was, had all kinds of books and was trying really hard to figure out how to do astrology, but it was all just a jumble of facts and data, and I couldn't figure out, like, where do you start and what context do you put this in? And so that's what your certification course really helped me do.
Mm-hmm.
And as a structural engineering background, I want that foundation first.
So important, yeah.
Foundation first, and then everything you build off of that can come in time. So really, your certification course, Module 1, started off with the frameworks, and I must have, as the class kept going forward, I spent the next 3 weeks just doing diagrams, taking notes, and it was just a whole new model to see the world. And it was just like Myers-Briggs, where you've got the different profiles. Seeing it through these frameworks just made it so easy to see the world, and it was just that gave me that structure to kind of build everything off of.
Awesome. And that's what you're going to be showing us today.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get to your slides. So why don't you pull them up? But not to cut you off, but you're right. We're right at that point, because that's what you're showing. And I'll just say, Casey was fantastic in this regard, where he took, students don't always apply what you teach. And for a teacher, one of the greatest things is to see a student, really take what you're teaching and really embrace it, and then make it their own. And that's what Casey's doing. So he took my course, and those frameworks are universal, and they're universal from Sankhya philosophy. Again, gunas, elements are like the frameworks, but then the dualities of the sun and the moon and the earth and the yin and yang and inner and outer, and how it all just provides the structure for everything that you build on top. And with Casey, I would imagine, with your engineering background, consciousness itself is a product of divine engineering.
Right. Exactly.
You wouldn't think of it, but and we tend to not think of it that way. But the Indian rishis, they were scientists. It's a spiritual science. These are spiritual sciences, and it sounds like that's a contradiction, but it's not.
Right.
And the Vedic sciences hinge on these spiritual principles that are scientific. They're not woo-woo, I don't know, I just kind of make it up and float around. Well, we make it up and float around, but that also has a context of what is actually floating, and who and what it looks like.
Right.
And
it's a whole blueprint, right? It's a whole blueprint for how this is happening. Yeah.
So let's see your screen. I'm anxious to dive into it.
Okay.
You'll see his great presentations. I'm sure he's got some good stuff for us. So take it away.
Can you see my screen there?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, so here we go. The first thing, what I learned from your teaching course was that before you just launch into talking about all the nuts and bolts, you have to give it context, and like, what is it and what's the whole idea here, right? So we often call it Vedic astrology, but the word for it is Jyotish, and that word means, it's made up of two parts. Jyotish is Jyotis, means light, brightness, or illumination. And Ish is a word that means understanding, mastery, or duration of time. So combine that, and it means what most people say, the science of light, or the knowledge of consciousness, right? So in the Rig Veda, which is an ancient text that's 5,000 plus years old, Jyotish was the practice of knowing the right time to conduct a ceremony and to do rituals and to do it in alignment with the sky and the universe, and to be in tune with what's happening in the solar system, right? So its four main applications are choosing favorable times and to do rituals and such. And then what most astrologers use it for is hora, for birth chart interpretations, where you take the moment somebody was born and interpret the placements of the planets and the signs and the houses. And then there's mundane astrology, which you do a really good job of, which is using the astrology of the current sky to explain, world manifestations and events that are happening.
And you just did some research on the Neowise and went into the Brihat Samhita, right? Looking for the
Yeah,
omens from Varahamihira, right?
that was interesting because this summer there was this comet and everyone's looking at this comet and looking at the sky, and we're, astrologers want to say what's that about. And so I didn't have an answer for that, so I did some research and looked through the text. It was a very interesting, fascinating
Yeah, so in
research.
Brihat Samhita of Varahamihira, he talks about comets. I got to look at it, but anyway, I just wanted to say you also yeah, I do a lot of the world events because we can see our collective reality, especially understanding the transits, and really learning about how transits influence even a natal chart by watching the influence on world events, because it's all of our collective. It's the shared reality that we're living.
Exactly. And, a lot of us astrologers do the new moon and full moon posts, and we just talk about things generally for that, where the sun and moon are, just those two.
Even that's
And
huge.
a lot of times people are like, how are you in my head? It's just so fascinating. And then the other thing that we use Jyotish for is prajna, which is like a divination, answer a specific question at a specific moment in time. And so this next slide, I'm going to talk about, the overarching purpose. What is the unifying purpose of all the Vedic science is self-realization, right? And that's a word that's thrown out there a lot, but what does it really mean? And it means to break free of this illusion that we're a physical human being and everything is separate from us, right? The cosmos is separate from us. You say this a lot, is like, is this my free will or is this the cosmos? Like, those are two separate things. It's all one thing, right? So Ayurveda is one of the Vedic sciences that we use to understand and maintain the physical body and its functioning as a vehicle for the spiritual process. And then yoga is the Vedic science that allows us to practices that align our body and mind with the spirit. And then Jyotish is the Vedic science that gives us the blueprint for, what's happening in our mind and why. And so that's really what the biggest gift of it is to be able to take these, birth charts from like sometimes 50, 60 years ago, this moment in time, and describe what's actually happening in their mind right now in this moment. So it's mind-blowing every single time, and it works.
Yeah, I'm still fascinated and shocked that it works.
Right, and your course taught me how to do it just blind, right? Where that's what I really wanted to do to test myself, was to get some information from a person. I didn't know who they are, anything about them. All I have is their date, time, place, and to just write it up as a science, like you taught me to do it, and then just send my feedback over there and just watch what happens. And it's just amazing every single time.
And it worked, huh?
It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I always tell students it's like, just trust what you've learned. Just try it. Just get out of your idea for a second and trust that what you've learned is correct, and see what happens, and you'll be blown away by the feedback.
And it's so easy for everybody to get caught up in the, I don't know this, I don't know that, right. There's more things to learn. But if you could just get grounded in this stuff, you can do so much with it, right?
Yeah, and you said something at the beginning I also want to highlight, is you said that you're teaching what you know.
Right.
And stay with what you know. But that's always the case with every good astrologer. And again, this is why I even tell students that take the course, as you heard me say many times, even by the third or fourth month of the course, you can start having some really in-depth conversations. Just stay with what you know. Just don't act like you know more than you do, and go really deeply into what you know, but try it, like practice it a little bit, and you'll be blown away by how much you actually do know. And then, but the problem with astrologers always is that they get away from what they actually know. And that's astrologers at my level too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's just so helpful if you even don't even pretend I know more than I know. This is what I know, and that's what I'm sharing,
Right.
right? So,
I get it too. People ask
yeah,
me to say things. Hey, what about the stock market? What about this? It's like I don't really bother with it. I'll just say
right.
I don't I don't know.
There's a way, but I haven't done research, so it's
Yeah, I'm
like
just not
this is
interested.
stuff that I've
There are
spent a
things
lot
that
of
people
time
ask
with, and
me.
it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, people ask me all the time about things that I just don't really do or want to do. So, but
Hmm. Yeah. So the this map here is something I pulled from Vasant Lad's book, and it's a little map of what's happening, spirit taking form,
it's a
right?
beautiful illustration.
It's great, yeah. And so really, just to boil it down, we have outcomes, and that outcome comes from taking an action, right? Actions create outcomes. But before that, we had a thought or a feeling that led to the action. But that's usually where we all blank out. We don't know. So where does the thought originate, right? In Western thinking, we don't have a grounding framework that tells us where thoughts come from, right? It's just an electrical impulse by the brain, and there's it's just a computer, and we don't know why it works that way. Right?
Right.
So Samkhya philosophy is really a beautiful, and this diagram especially is just a beautiful illustration of how it all happens. And Samkhya philosophy has been really good to map that, right? Me as a blueprint person, I want that blueprint of how it all happened. What's going on here? And so Samkhya philosophy gives us the roadmap of that entire process of manifestation. And knowing that, we can reverse engineer from manifestation back to spiritualization, right? So, and then the ancient seers and sages say that karma is the source of thought patterns called samskaras, right? That's like what we would call a neural pathway in modern day science. And many of those tendencies are imprinted on our mind at the moment of birth, right? And we could just say our parenting and our situation that we grew up in is what conditions our thought patterns, right? So all that's shown in the astrological chart. And I like to call it just because I have blueprint, I like to call it the blueprint of our karma.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
And you
that's,
have, can you go back to that slide
oh, sure.
again?
Yeah.
Can you make especially the Rajas, Tamas, Sattva at the bottom, you see Purusha and Prakriti are related to the sun and the moon, whereas Purusha is the
Right.
sun.
Right.
That's the undifferentiated conscious, the undifferentiated self. It's the one. It's the same one that's in me, that's in you, that's in
Right.
everything, that's in the trees. The one. There's only one of them. That's Purusha, undifferentiated. It's also Shiva, again, which is the power, the all-pervasive, unifying power.
Mm-hmm.
And then it breaks off into Prakriti. Once we get Prakriti, that's the mind. That's the moon and the mind, where it starts to take form. And the first form is a thought form, a feeling form. So our karma comes from that undifferentiated realm of Purusha into Prakriti, which is then the mind
Mm-hmm.
and the consciousness and that feeling. That's why we read nakshatra-based dashas, which are lunar dashas that are connected to Prakriti.
Right.
Because the
Yep.
first, and it means also that our past actions that we took in form the consciousness and the jiva. It's also that Purusha is Paramatman or supreme self, and Prakriti is Jiva Atman or separate self.
Right.
So the Purusha and Prakriti are sun and moon. Then you have Mahad and Ahamkara. These don't break out necessarily into specific planets, but then you have that after Ahamkara, we break out into the three gunas of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, and Tamas winds up being the five elements, the five gross elements
Yep.
of earth, water, fire, air, and space, and then Rajas is in between, and
Right.
then Sattva breaks out into the mind, or what's called the buddhi, or no, the what is it? The organs, the mind. Yeah, here it just
Yeah,
says
the
mind, but
sense
then it has the
faculties
five.
and
I'm sorry, huh?
the sense faculties and the motor organs. And
Oh yeah, that's right. They're called the
Yeah.
tattvas, and then you
Yeah.
have the mind what are called the karma indriyas and the jnana indriyas.
Yeah,
This
there
is
you
in
go.
the yoga philosophy. That's the
Yeah,
5 motor organs and the 5 sense organs.
right,
So this is in the yogic principle, in the yoga context, this is how consciousness comes from this undifferentiated, non-localized place
right,
into a separate consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime with us. That's what Prakriti is.
right. And
Prakriti,
it's great that this framework, and what most people don't realize even when they're aware of Vedic astrology, is this framework applies to all the Vedic sciences. It's built into the astrology chart.
yeah, it's in the first chapter of Parashara Horasastra. He flat out says that that God operates through the 3 gunas and 5 elements, blah blah. But I just
Right.
wanted to go back because this diagram is so rich. I wanted
It
to
is.
give it some
Yeah.
context here.
hmm Okay, so to really give it a perspective, we have to kind of understand where most of us are coming from, right? In the East or from the West, is that we look at ourselves as if we are the body, and that this body has thoughts and feelings. And then, like I said, the origin of thought is kind of abstract. Some people believe in God and all that, but it's not a practice. It's not an experience that we have. It's a belief that we have. And so it's not something we can experience through the body's senses. It's easily dismissed as that's not real,
Right.
right? And then in the East, it's the opposite, right? Everything comes from the ethers, and then that's the origin for everything that manifests in physical form. And so really they say physical form is only an illusion of the mind, right? And then that happens because of karma. And then that drives the illusion of physical form and keeps us trapped on this cycle of birth and death. And so we have to make this paradigm shift when we start learning any of the Vedic sciences, that we're coming from this perspective, that's in this context, that we're trying to realize the self is not this, it's the consciousness, right? It's the essence of ourselves.
It's great that you distinguish that as well, because that's a big thing that I make is that I say as well. In the West, the illusion is God. Well, I'm this body. I have these ideas. God, I don't know, perhaps. In the
Right.
East, it's totally different. God is the real thing. Our karma is real. And this world, I don't know, perhaps that's real. But so the whole reality paradigm is flipped upside down.
And so I went as far as to say in the early 1900s, this was confirmed by Western scientists through the discovery of subatomic particles, because up until that time, we thought that atoms were the smallest unit of the whole of the universe, and everything's built from that. So eventually that evolved into what we now know as quantum physics. But those discoveries, we learned that matter is really just energy in a different state of vibration. So everything is energy, and that's literally all there is, right? So,
and that's what they said in the Upanishads and Vedas a long time ago.
Thousands of years ago. It's like, and then now the Western paradigm has been shattered, and we're still like Wile E. Coyote out over the cliff, still running, haven't realized that the ground fell out from beneath us. So just a quick recap of what karma and dharma is, because we've thrown those words out, and it's just important to say, well, what are we talking about, right? So a lot of people throw out the word karma as in like this kind of stick and carrot type thing where what you do either comes back or it doesn't come back. But
Karma's a bitch.
That's not untrue. It's just a small understanding of a huger concept, right? It's the biggest concept that you can imagine. And that's the fact that this moment that we're living right now is the culmination of all time came to this moment, and we're living the manifestation of that. And then right now we can take actions and do things that influence everything that ripples out infinitely in time. So karma isn't good or bad. It's just one of those laws, like gravity. And so it is just operating on the subtle level rather than the physical level, right? And in the physical level, it's what operates everything. So just like you wouldn't say that gravity is bad, when you fell over and hurt yourself, or good when you don't fly off in outer space. It's just a law that operates. Which brings us to Dharma, right? That's what really this law, universal, something that operates, that's the way things are, a truth, is what Dharma is. That word translates into truth. It's not a perfect translation, but that's what we're talking about. So when someone's asking about your Dharma, because that floats around in the yoga world a lot, is what's your Dharma? They're asking about what you're uniquely designed to contribute and accomplish in your life, right? So all universal laws are an example of Dharma because they represent the way things are supposed to be, the way they are. And so space, gravity, electromagnetism, planets and moons orbiting the solar system. So everything that's discovered rather than invented is an example of Dharma.
Mm.
Right?
That's a good way to put it. You know, the thing, just to talk a little bit about that, about those two things too, because they're quite big. And this is great. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that everybody really needs to learn. Those two concepts of karma and dharma are probably, you know, there's a lot of misunderstanding of Indian principles, and words get all kinds of meanings now. Chakras is another one, and everything we now can invent any meaning for anything that we want.
Right.
And like you said, you know, karma is definitely, it's a law, and there are qualities of the law. Like karma is that law that regulates dharma, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah.
We're always living in some relationship with the truth, the highest truth. And our actions are karma, means the actions we take are somewhat in alignment or out of alignment with dharma, which is the highest truth. The highest truth being what you said at the beginning, that we're not just this hunk of meat with a bunch of ideas doing stuff. And because we're identified with that, that's the truth that we're operating from. It incurs karma, which means we then have to receive the actions that come from that motivation. And so karma and dharma work this way. And again, like you said very accurately, there's no judgment in these two laws. Just like, you know, karma is never wrong. The universe does not make mistakes. And this is an important thing for people to understand, because you'll hear astrologers even say this kind of stuff, or people who are spiritual people or whatever, who will think that, oh, well, you know, something in the chart is wrong, or that a client is doing something that's wrong. It's a very subtle thing when you're doing a reading, but the client is always doing what's right for them in the moment. And astrologers have to be careful not to condition themselves to think that people are making mistakes. Again, we're here to try to align them with the highest truth and let them see how their actions are out of alignment with the highest truth, with their highest truth.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, the overarching principle, the thing we always have to stay grounded on, self-realization, realize the self, right? And not to impose your idea of how things are supposed to be onto nature, right? That's our big problem.
And it's challenging for astrologers, because at times we want to help them, but we have to be careful to not pathologize, quote, the mistakes, because they're also noticing the mistakes, and they know that these things are acting out of alignment with our higher purpose. The point, and the reason I'm saying this, is because it's important for astrologers to understand the difference, understand the difference, that the person is not making mistakes. And don't frame it like mistakes. Frame it like we would say to a child who doesn't understand. It's ignorance. The only mistake is ignorance. And the other thing that I'll add about the East and West is that the only is the Judeo-Christian, whether we know it or not, we're influenced by a Judeo-Christian kind of God concept of God is both good and bad. God punishes, God rewards. No, not in the Eastern sense. God rewards. Our ego punishes us. All punishment is karma revealing our ignorance of dharma.
That's a good
we're
clarification.
Suffering, it's the law of karma revealing our attachment to the ego rather than to our highest self.
Right. That's our actions being out of alignment with truth, right?
With
Which
dharma.
is where the suffering comes from. Yeah.
Right. So karma out of alignment with dharma means actions out of alignment with truth is what creates suffering. And it only happens through the ego. So the ego, we identify with the separate self as an ego, which means we're now not in alignment with dharma, our highest self, and we're taking actions based on that ignorance. All of our suffering is self-imposed because of our ignorance. So when we remember this, we understand that the person is not wrong, they're not making mistakes, and the job of an astrologer is to then explain these things. This is why, again,
Right.
as you know in the course, it's like you don't want to get into judging and pathology. This is why I say this stuff so much, because it's very easy, even in wanting to help a person, to wind up judging. Judgment can come in very quickly. Oh, it was wrong, wrong, wrong. And to be able to separate that out. And instead
Right.
of getting into judgment, getting into explanation, you've got to explain everything. Everything is about the explanation. And like you're doing very accurately here, first we have to understand what we're explaining. Like, what's the point of all this?
Right.
And if we don't know that, then we don't know what we're explaining. And instead, we're just judging.
And just
this
being
is
able
why
to
so many
articulate
astrologers-
some
I'll
of
be
these.
quiet and then I'll let you talk. This
Okay.
is why so many astrologers get into so much judgment, because they don't understand these things that you're
Right.
talking about right now. They don't understand these principles. When you understand them, then you're not confused about what you're explaining. And then the planets fill in that. Please go
Right.
ahead.
So the just being able to articulate some of these things, sometimes people are like, you just described the thing that I've always been suffering from, and I never knew how to give it words until you just said it. Right. So that's a gift in and of itself, is to be able to talk about something that somebody's been suffering with their whole life, and to say, here it is, here's what the spectrum looks like, and the evolution can go from there to there, and you can just think about every time you've done it right, and that'll help you work through
And you
that all the
explain to them
time.
times that they've
Yeah.
done it right, because no matter how difficult something is, there are times in their life when they did it perfectly, and you can
Right.
explain it to them and tell them and ask them to explain to you a time when they did that thing well,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
remind them that that's the divine power, because it's always there.
Right. Yep.
Great.
So this slide here, I just gave a example of a birth chart that I made. It's actually mine, but it's, like I said, it's a blueprint, and I like to think of this South Indian chart as like a clock, right? Because it helps us see the architecture of the solar system, and then each box represents a sign, and then within each box it's one of the planets moving through it, and they all have different speeds that they move through the 12 signs, and it gives us just a map of that energy of the time, right? So one of the big things that I was missing for a long time is, like, where do you start, right? When you first get involved with Vedic astrology, and many of my clients are first time they've ever even heard of or experienced Vedic astrology. So my role is to really stay grounded in those basics, and so be able to talk about, okay, this is the solar system, and from the place on the planet that you were born. And the first thing we start with is the rising sign, right? That you'll hear contradictory statements on that in Vedic astrology. Even other people talk about looking at things from the moon. That's just when we didn't have precise sciences to say this is what was rising. They would read things from the moon. But because we have computer programs that can just get it down to the minute and figure out where the sky is, we use the rising sign, because that gives us the architecture of the whole sky and the solar system and where everything was. And we can take the principles that we're going to learn today and just start doing math. Really, basically, is do this is that, and that's that, and but where you start is the ascendant, because that's where everything's filtered through, right? So where the Earth was turning on its axis, one of the 12 signs was emerging from the ground into the sky. And so I always say, think about that first moment you were born, you took a breath, and so that's the invisible making contact with the physical, right? And so
The way I
that's what you're
explain it is the
seeing.
moment that we were placed on the wheel of time in
There
this
you go.
world.
Yeah, spirit took form, right?
Yeah.
So then you can look at, just to get it visceral, to think about the sky as the invisible, kind of the subtle energies, and then the earth as the physical form. And then you can just, that's how you connect the two things. So
and also interestingly is the word lagna means the intersecting point, the
Right.
intersection, and the cross, the intersection. It's moving like this, and it's the intersection of your karma in this invisible form with form.
Right.
It's why, so it is an intersecting point. It's a great word, lugna,
Yeah.
where your karma is now intersecting with this world, because
Right.
we have karma in all the worlds.
Mm-hmm.
When we're dreaming, we're in karma. But the karma of a body that needs to breathe and eat and all that is this world.
Yeah. So that each one of those 12 signs has different qualities that we learned about in the certification course. And I've got them listed on this chart here, where we've talked about Tamas, Rajas, Sattva, and then we've got masculine, feminine, which we'll talk about, and then
Can you
different
make that a
elements.
little larger, the chart? There's a, looks like it, yeah.
So
yeah,
there we go.
Cool.
So we see it's a fixed sign.
And we'll have
it's
this handout. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we'll have the handout below. There'll be a link to it.
So when I made my chart, I wanted to have those qualities really prominent, so that A, as a learning tool for me when I was starting to learn, and B, as people who are new to this subject that are interested in learning more about it. So that's where I was coming from for that. And so that's what this chart is just a blueprint of our energetic DNA. That's how I refer to it. So the next slide that I'm going to talk about is kind of my version of that beautiful diagram of Samkhya, where I'm kind of filtering down these different ideas and philosophies into principles, right? So each one of those is a way to look at the world, right? And so this principle of one is what we talked about, that everything is energy and that's all there is, right? So what we call that the quantum field, right? So nothing's separate from the quantum field. There's nothing separate from the cosmos or God, whatever you want to call it. It's got lots of definitions, but we don't have a soul. We are a soul, and we are inherently connected to that. Yeah, we're the same
soul.
thing.
It's not your soul and my soul. It's
right.
Soul.
Right. So people preach it, but it's important to just make it tangible, right? It's literally, we know this from science, that everything is energy. We're energy. You're energy. Everything is energy that's vibrating out of this field, right? And the field is what we call God, right? Vishnu, Sri Vishnu. And so we don't have a soul. We are a soul. And the physical form is an illusion of the mind. So that's what I call principle of one. That's where it all starts, right? Sanatana Dharma. And so we can't ever lose track of that, because it's what helps us.
And on this diagram, can you go through that?
Yes.
Take us through this just real quick, at least down how this works. So
then we would look down to the next way to see it. So this is the most simple way to see the universe.
I see one. You have all things broken out here.
So the second one, we would look at it. There's two different ways that energy moves. Once we're identified as a separate self, there's a masculine energy, which is energy coming from the self out into the environment. And then there's a feminine energy, which from the environment integrated with the self, right? Surface moving outward, surface moving inward. And then the gunas are what I kind of call the three whys. Why do we do anything in our life? Is A, when we first identify with that separate self, and I'm me and I'm separate from everything else in the world, the first thing that rises in our mind is that fight for survival, right? So that's what we call tamas. And then that's where we're aware of danger. Things can get us, things can hurt us. We need to protect the body, protect everything that we've identified with as my family, my stuff, my toys, all these things, my stuff, right? And then we've got Rajas, which is the kind of the in-between, where we I'm an individual that's separate, but you're also an individual that's separate, and we've kind of got mutual desires, so let's work together, share together. That's Rajas. It's about sharing and experiencing pleasure, and it's kind of what gets the energy moving, right? Tamas would be like we're asleep in our bed, and Rajas is like we got to get up and do stuff, right? Because we have a desire. And then Sattva is about the rising above all of the protection and interaction of the world, and kind of learn something and to expand who we are to something that's closer to the truth, which is we are everything, right? So that's the breakdown of the gunas, as far as we can see the whole world through this lens of the principle of three. And
Well,
we
I love
can
how you're
break
doing
it.
that, because the one is that oneness, and then oneness breaks down into duality
Yeah.
of the polarity between masculine and feminine, and that's also on the illustration from Dr. Lad, but it's
Mhm.
of the Sankhya philosophy. The Purusha represented the one of everything,
Yeah.
and then Prakriti actually includes Purusha, so that's where the duality comes in.
Right.
And then you had the three comes in, where Mahad, or divine intelligence, but then you have like the three gunas. So there's the one, there's the oneness, then there's the duality, then
And then from
after
the two, three
duality, there's
springs
the
up. Yeah.
three gunas to fight for survival, to share. After we're safe, then we want to share what we have, then we want to transcend all that to the transcendence of the sattva. So it's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, and then from that, the three whys, we would have the hows. How do we do it? And that's where we come up with the elements. And I put 4 on here because those are the 4 that are on the astrology chart. But there's a 5th element, which is ether or space, which is the container with which they all appear in or on, right? It's the consciousness. And so the different elements are each connected to one of the 5 senses, right? Which is how we experience life on Earth. And it's what I really like the way that Swami Sri Yukteswar describes it in Holy Science, which was Yogananda's guru. He calls them the 5 aura electricities, which he says the 5 aura electricities constitute the body of Purusha, right? So from those 5 energies that we experience through the 5 senses, right, which are just different ways that we interpret the vibration of the field, and it is all those 5 things constitute the causal body of Purusha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then
And
here
it
we
says
have
that the Rashis are the body of the Kala Purusha. That's what the
yeah,
signs are, the Rashis.
okay,
And they're
yeah,
elemental. They're
yeah,
charged with those elements.
right, that we would call those the primordial elements with which everything in physical existence is created. So that's just another way that we can view everything in existence. It's universal. Like we can look at what's earth, what's water, what's fire, what's air, and we can break everything down in that viewpoint, right, from that perspective. So that's why I break these into principles like that, because it's just a way we can look at the world, right, and just purely from that, and nothing will ever be outside of that,
Right.
because it's universal. So then we have the Purusartas, which I included here, but they're included on the astrology chart too, but not necessarily part of the class or the presentation. But they're the life lessons, right? We come here to experience truth, inspiration, authenticity, or artha, which is, physical manifestation, possession, and attachment. And then there's kama, which is enjoyment, which is pleasure and desire and attraction. And then there's moksha, which is we want to be liberated from that and detachment from everything, right? So then we can look at everything. Another way we can view everything is through the lens of the planets, the 7 planets that we use in Vedic astrology, which does not include the outer planets because of the light, right? Because we call Jyotish the science of light. And these are the planets that reflect light into the sky that we can see with our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah, and Jyotish is very practical about it being physical karma.
Right. Yeah.
And the karma of the physical planets.
Right. It's things that we can work through, right? If you just think about what light is, it makes us aware and be able to see something.
Right.
And if there's no light, it's like you're fumbling in the dark trying to figure something out.
That visible karma, literally, because it's the, again, karma means action. So it's the actions that we've taken and the consciousness that produced the action and the action that keeps that same cycle or changes the cycle. Right. And so actions are something we can see. Again, it's very practical and simple. Yeah. Now, some people say, well, you can see Uranus sometimes and all, but that's a whole different thing. That they're not within that schema. And one thing that's important is because these visible planets also are what activate the astral body and the body of the chakras and all of that as well. So
Exactly.
I didn't
Right.
want to interrupt your flow there, because I know that you have on your other slides that you have this broken down too, but I just wanted to hit that really quick so that we got an
Yeah.
overview.
Yeah, and I think that's a good overview, and it's a good way to, I mean, like you said, there's neo-astrologers who introduce all that stuff, but I think that's good once you've grounded yourself
Right.
in this. Then you can explore all that other stuff, but
Yeah,
to
it's true. And
start with that solid foundation,
yeah, just to say, and it's not, I'm a little less worried about making the statements, because I know a lot of people that do the Neo-Vedic astrology and whatnot, and it's fine. But when it's used as a substitute, when someone doesn't understand, like, the really, the classical rulers and the relationship of the planets to things like the chakras and the principles, and you're sacrificing like what's really in the text, especially, like, I never use outer planets, actually, because there's everything that you really need to learn, or everything that you need to read the chart in the classic text, especially Parashara, Horasastra, when you use all those principles of rulerships and yogas and dignities and all this stuff we're talking about with Sankhya philosophy, you never really need to look outside and say, well, Neptune was here, Uranus, especially in natal charts. And I've definitely seen, especially with a lot of Neo-Vedic astrologers that came from a Western astrology background, they're really doing a lot of natal work. Like, I couldn't do it without Uranus or Neptune or Pluto. It's like, again, it's not an insult. It's just that if it's a crutch, then you're not really doing the classical Vedic astrology, And again,
Right.
It's not an insult. It's just true.
It's just overlooked this part. Right. If you're grounded in that, you don't see anything outside of it if you are really grounded in it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, I love this slide. These slides are great. These illustrations.
This is a diagram that I created to kind of give me a really tangible example of the masculine, the principle of two, right? We talk about this idea of the separate self, right? And we are born because of the union of masculine and feminine energies, right? The sperm and the egg is the example of masculine initiation and the feminine receptivity, right? So that idea, the appearance of outside and inside, the me and the other in me, is what creates this polarity within the mind that we refer to as duality. So when we say masculine with all the gender stuff now, we have to really clarify that this means that outward projection of energy, right? Every human being has masculine energy, whether you identify as masculine or feminine, every human being has that, right? So it moves from the surface out, and its archetype is the sun. So the sun has no receptive qualities. It's all outward, emit light, heat, no receptive qualities. And I relate that to the left brain, which is about, math and science, logic, reason, objective knowledge, right? So we all have two hemispheres in the brain, and we kind of all have that identify with, I'm a left brain, right brain person. No, we're whole brain people who tends towards one or the other. And this principle helps us figure that out, right? Is that if you have a lot of planets doing things that are more masculine, then you would see like, oh, this person has more of a left brain tendencies, right? And then if you have more of the art and science and feminine planets that are more powerful, you would say, oh, this person is probably more artsy and creative. And it doesn't like this sequential process that I'm kind of putting forward right now. But it's helpful for everybody.
No, but see, your visual there makes it's a good unification. And, it's a sign of a rounded, knowledge and wisdom and anything that's sustainable and sustaining has a strong combination of both, or both in somewhat equal measure, because even though you're very left-brained in many ways, you come at it from a very right-brained, integral, sensitive, integrating capacity, because this is also qualities of the left and right. The right is it's about distinction and difference and separation. When the light comes, you see all the details.
Right.
That's the left, or the masculine. And then the feminine is the integrative, how it all fits together, how it all weaves together, is
Hmm.
also the feminine or the right brain. So wisdom is really a combination of this yin and yang, masculine, feminine. Like we're saying with astrology, it's a combination of seeing all those details and being able to separate them. But then when you're talking to another person, being able to integrate them into something that is holistic, not like you're listening to a computer.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Hmm. So,
And I love, just real quick, I love how
yeah,
this
sure.
diagram shows again the Purusha and the Prakriti. Like you've taken that
Hmm.
oneness up here at the top that says unified field, and then the thing underneath of it is really beautifully laid out how that unified field breaks out into duality. You've included both. This is like a archetype of the sun and the moon here, beautifully.
Yeah, yeah, that's just really the way you taught it, and the way
Yeah,
that it's just an easy way to capture it, right? Because this is kind of always my challenge when I've got a lesson, to capture it on one page. That's always my challenge to myself, is to, can I make everything and articulate everything and do a little diagram on one page, so that's all you need,
it's
right?
beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
great job.
So this is where I said duality of the mind, illusion of the separate self. So we experience life through the active mind, which means the part of itself that feels separate from that unified field, and it creates that polarity to the energy that we experience through the five senses. So that polarity limits the scope of what we experience by applying simplistic good or bad judgments to what we see, hear, feel, smell, taste, or see. So it's like the five senses are all we can grasp, right? The more we are binary in our approach, right? And this world right now could use a little lesson in left and right, right?
Right.
So the more we can integrate that into one whole, the more we're kind of transcending that whole illusion. So I do all sorts of left right brain things, to help merge those two tendencies,
One of the best things is music. They say that playing music, actually listening to music, but also learning an instrument
Mm-hmm.
is one of the most integrative ways, because you have to learn a skill. Like it's like details, but then it's integrative as well.
Right, yeah, it's like playing guitar, for example, is that
Yeah,
right brain music. With the left brain, you have to get the
you have
scales,
to
and
physically
it's very
do it.
mathematical. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right, so we're moving on to this three, which is the gunas, right? And so I kind of touched on this. Once we identify as that separate self, right? The first thing that springs up is this fight for survival. So we understand our deeper motivations from a brain science perspective. Like you use the triune brain theory in one of your model. You did the quantum physics and the triune, and I love that course. I took it a long time ago. Love that course.
it's a fun
So,
one.
so we understand our deepest motivations through understanding these kind of three states of awareness, right? So I'll start from the lowest, just because that's easier. The lowest, most unconscious state is called tamas, which is motivated to avoid difficulty, defend, protect, which we would call the instinctive brain that comes from amygdala and cerebellum, right? So this is what we would call in the triune brain the reptile brain, right? That just wants to survive. And so that's really our core. We can't really do anything spiritual until our needs are taken care of, right? There's a hierarchy of needs, and the most important thing is I've got to have air, I've got to have food, I've got to have things that make my physical body
Did you
exist.
say hair or
Air, I got to breathe. You have to be able to breathe, you got to be able to eat,
yeah,
take care of all
air?
of your needs. Yeah. Air. I'm losing some of that. So then, once that need is addressed and taken care of, the intermediate state, most conditional state, is what we would call rajas. And that's motivated to fulfill desire and experience pleasure. And we would call that the feeling brain, or the animal brain. And that comes from the limbic system. So that kind of basic control program would be approval and acceptance and
Can you make the
being part of
diagram a little bit bigger? Because I want
Yes, I
people
could
to
do
be
that.
able to see these things that you have, because the writing is small, but it's just beautifully laid out.
So
That's
there we
great.
go. So there we can see that the protection state relates to actions and results, right? Because it's the physical body, and that's what tamas is about, addressing those needs. And the instinctive reptile brain, and it's about self-preservation, vital function, individuality. It's about understanding ourself, right, as an individual. And it's really the unconscious action. So it's motivated to understand the individual's position in time and space. So it's protective instinct, asserting boundaries, and it has that negative charge, which is about seeking control, safety, and independence. So it's easy to call that one the bad one, right, if we get into judgments. But really what that does is it helps us, you know, like a firefighter is an example of tamas working in, you know, in its operation, in optimal operation, right? Where
It's also the
someone's,
physical, and it's
yeah,
also just the physical.
just
And
the
everything
physical.
that we're going to
Yeah.
do is going to be through our physical organism. We
Right,
have to take our body. We're here in a body, so the
right,
higher needs to come down and be expressed through some physical action.
right. So that's the negative of it, is we're
Right.
in our problems, right? And the positive would be that we overcome problems. The tamasic people are the ones that you want to go to with the problems, because they're not afraid of them, right? They're not like, I don't think about negativity, you know, get out of here with that, right? It's like, if you have a problem, you need someone to help you work through it.
And
Go
if you
to someone
notice
with a lot of
Casey's
tamas.
chart, if you happen to notice Casey,
Yeah, right. I know how to deal with that.
and again, one of the reasons, like Casey, if you saw, he has like Scorpio, Capricorn, Virgo, like all the tamasic signs. And again, what winds up showing, you know, the conditioning here is that the person is very aware of problems. Again, you know, the negative quality might be that they create problems, but the positive quality is that because they are used to finding problems and solving them, that they're good for solving problems. So they wind up being great counselors, therapists, and helping other people solve their problems, because
Yeah.
that's been their focus.
Yeah. And then Rajas would be where we are more in that thought and emotion state, right? Where it's the feeling brain about the animal, emotions, memories, habitual behaviors, and subconscious action. So it's motivated to understand the individual's relationship to other individuals, right? So it's about social etiquette, it's about emotional control, and it's seeking love, creative expression, and acceptance, right? That's the deeper why of anything. So if you see someone with a lot of plants in Rajasic, they want love and acceptance and interaction, right?
And
So
and you know, Rajas is really also very much about a desire. It's really like the word is desire. I love these words you have, though. The protection state is great. The attraction state, very good.
thank you.
There's a very good words for that. The other motivation for Rajas, though, is just that activity and desire. It's how we experience it more than anything. Is we have a desire for something. It's not always
Right.
something good. Sometimes our desire is something whatever, but it's just desire. That's one of the words that I use for it.
Well, one of the teachings that I said is you take that desire you've got for all the million things and fuel it to the desire for liberation.
Yeah,
Right?
desire for liberation is like the
Yeah.
last desire.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll hear this a lot of the time. People, especially like when you have a guru, which is up in the superconscious state, wanting to desire liberation, they'll say, well,
Right.
what about your guru? Is there a desire for the guru? It's like, yes, that's the last desire. That's the
Right.
desire that ends every other desire.
And that's going to be the hardest one to detach from, because we're attached to our spirituality, right?
We're attached to the gunas, and people should
Yeah.
understand the gunas are they're all attachments. So I'll let you continue.
Right. The word for them is the rope, right? The rope of Maya. So we're bound to these things.
Right.
So the sattva would be what I call the superconscious state, which relates to energy and vibration, right? It's that intuitive brain that's the human that comes from the neocortex. So it's about sensory perception, abstract thinking, conscious awareness. So it's motivated to understand how the world works, see the bigger picture. It's our moral compass and reasoning skills. So it's like seeking truth and higher purpose and unity, right? So it's trying to transcend all of the distraction of Rajas and the inertia of tamas, right? That's what we're trying to transcend with sattva.
And I don't want to overlook the way you've broken out that these that the tamasic energies are most related to the astrology houses, because the houses show how our feelings and emotions and our ideas take form. When you're reading the chart, the houses show the tamasic form of things. Again, tamas is just the form. This has a preponderance of tamas because it's a form, right?
Right.
Rajas is very much related to emotions, like you said, and that's the astrology signs. They're very rajasic. This is why we pay a lot of attention to the astrology signs, because we're very emotional and they show the emotions. They're usually, the easiest way to understand the signs is they're the masculine and feminine nature of the planets that rule them.
Right.
Taurus is the feminine quality of Venus. Libra is the masculine quality or feeling, like the emotion with the signs. Like you have down here, astrology signs are mental and emotional. And then astrology planets are the sattva, which are the source energies. Everything comes from the source, which are the planets. The sattva, it filters down into the feeling of the planets through the rajas or the signs, and then the form that those things take in the houses. So you did a great job here.
Thank you. Thank you. So this was a kind of an overview of that framework to see everything in the universe operates through a combination of these three qualities, and you can kind of just use those frameworks to understand, like, oh, this person's motivated by the tamasic, right? So because they don't have a problem to solve, they become the problem for everyone to deal with, right? And then the rajasic is that they get so spun out and distracted with a million different things because they don't have a higher motivation and a stronger desire to do something that's moving them in a direction, right? Because that's kind of rajas, was that tendency to kind of go around in circles, right?
And these qualities are all pervasive. So again, the planets are charged with guna; they're universal,
right?
And so are the rashis or the signs. But you have to know that in every situation, you're always reading these concepts. So for example, in someone's dasha cycle, regardless of what's going on or what their chart looks like, if they're running let's say they don't have any planets in tamasic signs, again, let's say, but they're now running Saturn dasha. Well, their capacity with tamas is now going to be a theme. And again, if they have planets in tamasic signs, particularly like Saturn is powerful or this or that, then the Saturn dasha is going to be more integrated for them. Again, this is always the way it works. And it's not just that Saturn will be more integrated, the tamasic quality of Saturn, which is going to bring us into our fears and fight or flight and how well we've been able to organize and manage. If that's prominent in their chart, then they're already used to that quality. So it can be a great power. If not, and like if Saturn is in a different, a sign that's a different guna, like in a sattvic sign, like a watery sign, or it's this or that, then they're going to feel the difficulty of that quality during that time. So these universal principles are always being evaluated in every situation, transit, dasha, natal chart, every situation, they're all pervasive.
And you could do a reading just from evaluating that by saying there's no sattva in your chart. So you'll tend to do this and this, but you need to integrate with more of this.
These are the kind of things that we do. And like when we look, actually, since you had your chart, can you hit that slide again? And we'll just look really quick. That's what we do. Like if someone were to do this chart, can you make it a little larger so we can see? Yeah. Like if someone were to do this chart, we would notice that the next one over. Yeah.
Okay.
So we would notice that he has all of these planets in all these tamasic signs. You see the rising sign is Scorpio. This is the rising sign, which is tamasic here. And, that's tamasic, but also the, we'll get it here.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the Scorpio rising sign is tamasic, but then he's got the 4 planets there in Capricorn, which are tamasic. That's also a tamasic sign. Virgo also has 3 planets, which is also a tamasic sign. And then Venus is there in a sattvic sign of Sagittarius. So there's nothing in a rajasic sign, for example. So again, those qualities of rajas. So So for example, like the negative qualities of, distraction and all that can be really, managed. But then the benefits, like the playful quality of Rajas, to just be light and be relaxed and have fun and just, hey, just have fun, have fun, have fun. Have fun is very Rajasic. We're very Rajasic people. Yeah. People are Rajasic. The world is Rajasic. We're motivated to enjoy and have fun. Now, again, that's not the only thing you look at, because the planets also rule it. Mercury and Venus are Rajasic. So they're the two Rajasic planets. So you can see that his Mercury goes into Capricorn. So the thing that he would have fun with is doing like this kind of spreadsheet with an exalted Mars and all that. So he enjoys the enjoyment, Mercury, of organizing things and taking it very seriously and wanting to get it structured and organized and mechanical, because Mars and Ketu are there. And the sun, those three fiery planets, loves that structure and that sort of mechanical thing. So you're always still reading gunas. It's not like they go away. Mm-hmm. But you would just notice in general, like Casey said, that when you would read this person's chart, that they have a lot of tamasic energy. So they will tend to overdo it. And again, this is one of the big principles of astrology, is when we're looking at the chart, we're looking at what someone tends to overdo and then underdo. So he tends to overdo the tamas and the worry, but it's going to make him very good at managing things, controlling things, organizing things, dealing with difficulty. But he tends to underdo the rajas, which is lighten up, have fun, don't take it too seriously kind of thing.
Yeah, never get invited to the parties, man.
But you can see, but honestly, I've met Casey in person. He laughs easily and is easy to have a good time and all like that. That Venus in Sagittarius is actually, it's in the Sattvic sign. It's quite, it's quite uplifting. So again, the thing you would tell the person is that when you're involved with things, again, that are serious, like you would read the gunas, you really enjoy things that are serious, where you can concentrate and focus, because that Mercury is in Capricorn, which is a tamasic, the power of the tamas. And you really enjoy, because Venus, the other Rajasic planet, is in Sagittarius. You really enjoy being inspired by great teachings, and you're going to really enjoy sharing those great teachings, because that's what Venus, that's the quality of Venus being Rajasic, is the joy of sharing and seeing others benefit, because Venus is where we want people to like us. We want to enjoy and share the things that we enjoy and see people enjoying life. So this is why Casey loves to share these teachings. And as soon as he started learning, he started teaching, because that Venus, that Rajasic quality to want to reach out to others and share what he's learned. But he made sure to take it very seriously. He didn't want to make a mistake, wanted to take it seriously, which is the power of the tamas, right?
Yeah, and that was like a really liberating part of your class on all the gunas, was to realize that all that quality of myself, right, the superpower of it is to work through that stuff when everybody's like, this is a drag, man. I'm loving it, right? And I'm getting through it and I'm working it, and like you said, I'm executing the teachings that you're teaching.
Yeah. Did you have a couple other slides? Because they look interesting. I'd love to just hit them too before we're done, because we still have some time. I'd love to see what you put up here.
So this is the slide that I made for the five elements, and it is a way that you can kind of see the two elements are masculine and then two are feminine, and then one is a combination of everything, right? So like I said, these are the five senses, and they relate to the five elements, and I called them the hows. These show how we execute the why that we just did in the gunas.
Can you zoom in a little bit more so we can see, because of a few things that I wanted to highlight here. And okay. I love how you have the downward, how you have them downward. It looks like it's a little weird to zoom in, huh?
It's a little weird, yeah.
That's fine. So I like how you have the fire in the air, the masculine pointing up.
Yeah.
And then the two feminine pointing down. Yeah, that's perfect. Right. Yeah, that's great. And how, again, those feminine qualities of water and earth are really where we pull inward. Mm-hmm. and feminine energy sensitizes and nourishes, where we want to stabilize and nourish and sensitize.
Right.
And organize and gather. By the way, that was also the thing with Casey's chart. If we were to look at how those signs are charged, they were also water and earth signs, which are all feminine signs. So it's a lot of internal process going on.
Right.
And so again, that's one of the things also that you would look at. But again, we also had the one planet in the masculine sign. Venus was in Sagittarius. So the thing that really gets him outward bound instead of just in the hole doing all this stuff is, oh, I can share and I can teach.
Right.
And it's Venus that, if you want to get him excited, get him out there teaching. By the way, I've been asking him to come on and do it for a while, and it took him a while.
Yeah.
I would say, come on and share this stuff. It's like, I don't know. I got to make sure. I'm like, come on, dude.
Yeah, I wanted to practice
sure
a few
right.
times. Yeah.
But we all benefit from that, because then by the time you got it done, you're really prepared.
Yeah.
By the way, I also have that honk in Saturn. I have Saturn in Capricorn, so I know the pressure of wanting to make sure it's right.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm a little less worried. I kind of let it rip a little more with all my Gothic energy. I'll clean it up along the way.
Yeah.
But I really like how you have these masculine, feminine pointing up and down. Anything that you wanted to say here?
So really, the reason why I have the fire and the water here kind of central is kind of our first kind of experience with the masculine is this passionate and reactive response, the fiery element, which is that impulse and conditioned behavior. So that's like really the first way we demonstrate or do the masculine, is that kind of just reaction based and instinct and impulse, like the little toddler that just does what they want, right, when they want to do it, and reacts strongly when you try to prevent them from doing what they want, right? So then when we kind of like get to what I might say a higher octave of masculine is the air element, which is more intellectual and social, based on morals and philosophies, and that kind of takes that initiation that's more just independent and makes it more interactive, right? So that's what air really does, is makes it interactive.
And also where we question our actions, because air is it's our ideas, where we're also thinking about what we're doing. Doing is the fire, thinking about what we're doing, bringing more discrimination. It's a more refined expression of the masculine.
But it can get stuck up here, right?
Yeah,
and then you need that fire to take it out of the brain and bring it into life, right?
Yeah.
And then the same kind of applies to the water and earth, where the water, our initial response and reaction to water is just emotional, right? It's about sensory responses and perceptions and intangible feelings, where we're just sensitive and attuned, right? This is as an infant, we're just, the first thing we do is cry, right? So
yeah, when you're saying infant, it's we have a tantrum and then we cry.
Right, we have a tantrum and then cry. So that's the very, very fire water.
Fire water, yeah.
But then we have to kind of evolve into air and earth, where air is that intellectual and social, and earth is more tangible, hands-on, practical, and so it's able to take everything that you're receiving through the water element and organize it into something that makes sense.
I've never thought of it like that, so that's a great distinction.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I see these here. And then the ether element is just conscious awareness of the unidentified observer. And so that's like, all this is appearing on something, right? On this screen of consciousness, right? All sounds come from silence. All sights come from emptiness. All the senses come from this field, and that's what ether represents.
And ether also, even just as an actual substance, is space. Yeah. And again, if you zoom out a little bit too, just look at the elements. We have earth, which of course is the earth, and then the water lays on the earth. Yeah. And then the water and earth create plants that we burn, which is fire. The fire disperses into the air, which is like what we breathe. But then if we want to go into space, we can't breathe anymore. We can't breathe. There's no air in space. Literally, this is also just a tangible thing. So when we go up into space, we need to take the air with us. So this is a concept of ether and of what space actually also is. It's where it's beyond the four elements of our karma. So our karma, this is what Casey was distinguishing earlier, is that the karma in the astrology chart is those four, and it ends with air is the most refined, which has to do with breath. It's also connected to thoughts. But then beyond that, we can't breathe. And again,
Right.
so it's beyond air and also beyond thought. So ether is that substratum, like you said, exactly as you said, but just even in the physical world that we see. It's literally once we go into space, then we need a spacesuit to take the air with us.
Right.
And just like when we go into our consciousness, it's the ether that can observe our thoughts.
Right.
It's that space behind the thoughts that can see the thoughts. And if we were just thoughts, then there would be no observer. There would be no witnessing consciousness. And the observer witness consciousness is in every Dharmic tradition, because that's what you get to in meditation. Meditation is not thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
That's air. Meditation is going deeper than thought, going above thought, and actually witnessing the whole thing happening, witnessing the body, mind, emotion, thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, those four elements are karmic because they're structured in time and space, right? So one of the practices in meditation, and one of the practices I've gotten from different modalities also, which is becoming aware of the space, because we are always focused on the objects of our perception. And when you become aware of there's space in between that and notice how that's appearing on something, and our brain just cancels all that out. So when we kind of bring our awareness to it.
Exactly. And when you're aware of space, you're aware of silence. Silence is the domain of space. Thoughts are not silent. They're not silent. Even though they don't make a physical sound that you hear, they make a mental sound that are constant. We never are hearing the silence because of the thoughts. It's our thoughts that are actually even louder than the noises external. So the thought vibrations are the inner noise. Just because they're not making a noise physical that's vibrating doesn't mean they're not an inner noise. And so when you start to notice space, you automatically notice silence because space is silent. And so again, this is a deep meditative awareness that comes when you feel yourself in space, but even externally, that duality, especially with having your eyes open and noticing noticing the outer world, but noticing the space between things. Again, you're introducing something that kind of is it's almost like a Trojan horse to destroy your programming.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you keep remembering space. And what happens is your ego has a hard time hanging on, because your ego is a very flimsy construct.
Right.
It's very tenuous. It doesn't take much to disrupt it. So meditators at some point start to trick the ego.
Yeah, and when you're outside the paradigm of karma, right? It's just like you said, or I said earlier, where it's a Wile E. Coyote. You just kind of distort the paradigm because we feel like this is everything. And then when you kind of become aware of something outside of it, you're like, wait, it's not universal.
Right.
Right.
And you introduce things, and karma, like we're describing, is actually like an instinctive reaction to our past. So even when we say when we're in karma, what that even really means is the way karma arrives in our life now is we have an instinctive program, not just from past lives, but then from what we've done in this lifetime and the progress we've made. It's still running an instinctive program based on all of the aggregate of all of that is what compels us to take action right now. And we're all taking actions right now and creating karma. Now, again, that's what karma is. It's just very simple, the actions, like this action that we're doing now, right? And so when you introduce something into that, again, it's kind of like a virus that, like a good virus to disrupt the habitual response. Because most of our karma arrives as these impulses called samskaras, which are instinctive reactions where we have very little free will. If people want to use the free will model, very little. And even though we've made progress on a lot of the stuff in the birth chart, we're still very instinctive. That doesn't mean we always act upon it. That's what we've learned. We've learned not to act upon our instinctive programming.
Right.
But if somebody wants to just tweak Casey a little bit, all they need to do is do something that goes against that stuff, that Scorpio, Capricorn control thing, and he's going to get tweaked because his nature is to instinctively act that way. With me, with all the rajas that I have, it doesn't mean I'm going to act on it like I used to or have a tantrum or do anything, but I'm still programmed that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you introduce consciousness into that, you're kind of disrupting the instinct.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And you had this last slide I wanted to
Okay,
see.
one last slide. This is my favorite one. So I kind of brought everything together into the seven chakras, and which brings the planets and the gunas and all of that into the model. And so on the left side, I'm talking about the path of manifestation. And on the right side, I'm talking about the path of spirituality, right? And I use that feminine, masculine, right? Because feminine, we're being receptive from the everything that's coming from subtle into tangible into manifestation is a receptive process. And then everything that we're trying to transcend out of it is a initiation process, right? And enlightenment. So I talked about the whole process of manifestation just from my other studies and all that. We have an input from the thought, right? We receive information, then we try to filter and analyze that information, then we try to make a decision, and then the decision becomes an action. The actions create results, and then you have an outcome that's manifest reality.
And you want to zoom in on that a little bit so we can read
Sure.
a little better? It's a little, I just want people to be able to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine.
There you go.
So if we start up here, we have the crown chakra, and that's operating in the thought and beyond really the physical, tangible elements. And then the third eye chakra is the sun and the moon, and Leo and Cancer on the astrology signs. And it's about the input, the receiving information, and then the output, really the enlightenment, right? So it's about ideas becoming reality. So I'll go down the left side and then up the right side.
Okay.
So it's about light, and it's about ideas coming to us from thought, right? And then the source of thought is up here, right? We talked about that. And then once we receive information, we try to analyze it and understand it and be able to explain it and talk about it. That's what Mercury does. It's about sound, and it's the throat chakra, right? It's about having a voice. So we make sense of that idea and learn how to talk about it, right? And then we have to learn how that idea impacts everybody around us, and that's what Venus helps us do. It relates to the air element, and it's the heart chakra. It's about decision making and decide how our idea affects ourselves and how it affects everybody else, right? Because if we only do something that is good for us and bad for everybody else, eventually that karma is going to create it's not in alignment with Dharma, right? So it's going to create suffering. So Venus's job is to help us understand not how it only affects me, but how it affects everybody else around me. And how to do things that honor my needs and also honor everybody else's. Not an easy job. So then we have ideas becoming actions, right? That's what Mars does for us. It's the fiery planet of take this idea and decision and actually do something, right? Execute. So we visualize that end result and start taking actions, right? And then evaluation, right? Once that action is in the world and we've done something, we kind of have this evaluation process. Did I do the right thing? And it's kind of emotional. It's intuitive. It's from Jupiter, right? It's about the water sign, water element, Pisces and Sagittarius. So we kind of reflect on how our actions affected the world around us, and we kind of adjust our vibration, right? And then here we come to manifest reality, which is outcomes. And Saturn is that planet of the root chakra and the earth element, and it's Aquarius and Capricorn. So really, at the final end, before anything becomes an outcome, we have to let go of our attachment to the outcome, right? Because once you can't want something and have it at the same time, right? You've got to let go. So then we would start moving up the other side, and we're trying to walk the path of spirituality. We have to address the needs of the physical body, right? That reptile instinctive brain that wants security and survival has to make sure that we have what we need as far as physical nourishment to actually start on the path of spirituality. And then we move up to Jupiter, and that's that mammal feeling brain that wants love and acceptance. So once we're on that path of spirituality, we got to heal, right? We're on the path of healing, and then we have to feel to heal, right?
Yeah.
And then Mars enters the realm saying that animal reactive brain, right? How do we wire that for spirituality? And so that's that using will and desire to move towards freedom. That was, we talked about that with the guru, right? Where we kind of take all those 1,000 little desires that we have and concentrate them on one that's just me liberated from all this mess, right? And then Venus helps us get peace in our heart, right? Contentment. And then that helps us guides us forward, right? Because people tend to use their heart and get hurt, but like once you're on that path of spirituality and you're working your way up towards it, you are thinking about fairness and equality, and you're on that path of happy for no reason, right? That's not a transaction anymore, right? And then you're really moving along on the path now once you're happy for no reason. And so then Mercury helps us use the intellect to make the unconscious patterns conscious, right? To understand all those programs that are running that we don't know we're doing. So it's that higher cognitive brain that wants to learn and understand, right? That curiosity, that's my brain saying, this is how it all works. This is how it all fits together. And then the sun and the moon come into through the third eye about having that insight, right? The single pointed awareness leads to all knowingness, right? That fully integrated being is enlightenment.
That's beautiful. And I'm just looking at all of the things that you put there, all of the explanations about how, you know, like from Aquarius to Capricorn, it was the having more detachment from the ideas and then rooting into the, I don't remember, but just looking at all of your comments here, you did such a great job with this. This is such a rich diagram.
Thank you.
You could teach a whole course on this. So I really appreciate how you put so much together here. And the download, this PDF will be there for people to download as well. There, it's so rich. I mean, you put so much into this presentation is so, again, so rich and so dense, and you went through it with such ease. I'm impressed for sure.
Thank you.
As someone who teaches and puts this stuff together, there's such mastery in what you're doing, Casey, and I'm just so happy to see it. And all of us are. Those others, you know, in the school with you and your colleagues and whatnot, you've done a great job and really distinguished yourself. And I'm really glad to be able to show your work here.
Thank you.
Today. And your website, do you have on one of these cards the Gold Star Astrology and whatnot? We'll have the links below, but anything you wanted to say about contacting you and what you're up to?
I do readings once a week on Fridays, and I have 2 openings, and you can get a hold of me through my website. It's gsastrology.com, and there's a link to schedule. I work with an institute here in town that I operate through, so you have to schedule through them. But that's how I do readings, and I've been doing readings pretty regularly now. Yeah,
so 1 day a week now, but that'll change soon. You'll be doing a lot more readings here.
Thank you.
Well, great. Any last thoughts? It was really great to have you here. You did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and really, this is for everybody who is on that same path that I was on. That's just been searching for, where do you start, right? Because it's such a vast field of knowledge, and usually when you have a mind for how does this work, you'll find Sam. And so then this was here as a tool for people to be like, this is where you start, and I really need to learn these things, even if you've already learned them through yoga or something, like to really go back to that, because I think people have that checklist and off they go to the next thing, and it's really overlooked. And so it's never too important you can never make it more enough importance to focus on these fundamental aspects, right?
And I learned a few things today just because because Casey has gone so deeply into them. I've been teaching these things for 15 years, and you brought up a couple things that I hadn't thought of. You can never keep going deeper, or you can't go too deep into these things that we talked about. In fact, even every time you explain them, you'll say, so I say something a little different every time I explain it, and it's a little more nuanced. It's a little bit better than the last time. Even I've been saying this stuff for 15 years.
Yeah.
And
all those diagrams manifested from me writing it by hand and then doing another one by hand and another one by hand and then finally put it on the computer. So it's like all these things evolve from just, love,
right,
just love of it, right?
This devotion to the teachings, and these teachings are a godsend, really, because the most important thing, and what really gets people started first, and what the reason everybody is watching this isn't because they thought they're going to do Vedic astrology. It's because they want to understand who they are and why they're here and what any of this is. I mean, it's actually a much more innocent search. Like Casey was telling his story, he was in a new age coaching thing, and kind of in the side door, this came in, and no one would have ever thought that you'd be doing this or thinking about this kind of stuff, but we're all trying to know what's the bigger picture. And thank God, years ago, thousands of years ago, the rishis pulled this stuff out for us to learn. So the fact that we can actually learn and understand how the universe works, how it produced us, everything else, and have it be right, it's a miracle that no one really thinks is even possible.
Right. And it's just all the Vedas is just a brilliant way of understanding the universe, right? It is just them cognizing what was going on and being able to describe it in really basic, simple terms. And that's how you really know a master teacher, when they can bring it down to distill it into just a single word, right? That's how they can do it.
Like Casey said, Jyotish is the science. All the Vedic sciences are comprehensive in one way or another, but Jyotish is the one that kind of overarches in all the others, because it tells us, it brings together all of the other, of like yoga and Ayurveda especially. Jyotish is the one that really brings out the why and the how and the when. And like, okay, it's great, I'm doing yoga, I can breathe, I can do this, Ayurveda, I'm eating the right food. But what's all this mean? Why am I even here? Who am I? That's the one that Jyotish answers. That's why everybody who's interested at some point in Ayurveda or yoga or whatever, they develop an interest in astrology as well, usually because they're like, oh, you mean there's one that actually even tells me why? Yeah. Like not just what to do, but who I am and why I even came here and why any of this is here. So it's like the most fundamental thing that we ever wonder about. The first thing we ever wondered is, who am I? What is all this?
Right, and it personalizes it to us, right? Yeah. The whole thing about Jyotish is it's you, right? And that's what everybody's like, well, hey, me, I love me, right?
It's again, like I say, it's exactly what you're not.
Yeah.
You want to know exactly what you're not?
Yeah.
You're exactly not this. This is the specifics of what you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
So at that, we'll leave it at that. And thank you again, Casey,
Thanks for having me on. I'm really glad we got to do this today.
Yeah, your wonderful presentation. You're welcome, man.